Well, good morning. How's everybody doing? Oh, come on. Yeah. Great to have you with us today. If you're jumping in, you're kind of jumping in partway through a conversation we're having about loneliness, and we started it last week in part one. If you missed it, you should go back and watch. It kind of lays the groundwork for part two that kind of go together. And we've been talking about the fact that we may not be alone, but we feel more lonely. I mean, in some ways, we've never been more connected than we are today. I mean, we've all got all kinds of social media friends and people we run into and contacts we have and family we see. But at the same time, for many of us, we've never felt more lonely. And as we began the conversation last week, what ended up happening was I started to hear from all kinds of you who are saying, man, this is me. Like, it's not that I'm alone, but I feel lonely. It's not that I'm not around people, but I'm not really sure how many meaningful friends I even have. I even had a television production company who saw the message and said, like, we want to interview you. We want to talk about loneliness. People are sending me stuff that they're seeing online about loneliness because it is a growing epidemic in our lives. In fact, statistics would say that 3 out of 5 people in this room feel lonely on a regular basis, that the younger you are, chances are much, much higher that you grew up feeling lonely for large chunks of your life. No matter sort of, and we don't think that. We don't realize, man, the younger you are, but that's actually what the statistics would say. And the U.S. Surgeon General last year kind of put a stake in the ground in the middle of 2023 and wrote a 72-page report saying loneliness may be the #1 health crisis in the United States right now. That it's led to an increase in cardiovascular disease, suicide, mental health challenges. We are facing an epidemic of loneliness. But it's not that we're alone. We're with people all the time, but we somehow feel lonely. And what we talked about last week is what we need to do is pursue meaningful relationships in our lives. The fact that God, culture would tell you that independence is the way to go. That you need to become more independent. You need to live your life on your own. You need to live your life where you don't need anyone else, right? You get the food delivered to your house. You don't have to see anyone. You can work from home. You can order everything from home. You don't need to interact with anyone else. Consumption is way, way more convenient, making relationships feel less and less convenient. And there's part of it that it's like, man, independence is the way you should head. But actually, it leaves us feeling lonely. And the Christian faith would argue, when you look at Scripture, when you look at what Jesus had to say, there's actually a countercultural argument that God is a relational God, that you are designed for relationship, that you are made for friendship, that you should have meaningful friendships, that you should have the kind of friendships where you laugh, and the kinds of friendships where you cry together, and the kind of friendships where you're with each other and you make memories together, the kind of friendships that last for a lifetime. At the end of the day, that's really what we want. You see, under your loneliness isn't a desire to be more connected. If you look up loneliness in the dictionary, the opposite is connected. You don't need to be more connected. How many people are here like, if I just had more Facebook friends and Instagram followers, I just feel less lonely? Like, that's not the way it works. We don't need any more connection. Under your loneliness is the human desire to be known. That you and I want people to know us. And we don't need everybody to know us. But we need some people in our lives who know us. People who we look across the table from and they hear where we're coming from. And they empathize with us. And they love us. And they care about us. And they want to live life with us. That's really underneath what so many of us long for. And that's not a surprise to God because that's how He made us. That's what He wired us for. But meaningful relationships, they're not something you fall into. I shared with you last week, there's something you got to fight for. I'm begging you in this series to fight for meaningful relationships in your life. You need meaningful relationships in your life. It is what you were made for. You were made to have people who care about you and who you care about. People who you make memories with. People who are with you today and with you at your graveside. People who are calling you and showing up when life gets hard. And people who are there celebrating when life goes well. You need meaningful friendships in your life, but you have to fight for them. You can't sit at home alone and hope a meaningful relationship just drops out of the sky. You got to, at some point, get out there and fight for them and look for them. But I kind of left you hanging last week. I'm going to be honest about that because I didn't tell you how. I didn't tell you how to make a meaningful friendship. And that's where this series has kind of left me. As I was preparing for this series, I got to this crossroads where I had to ask myself, is it possible to make a meaningful friendship? How do you start a meaningful friendship? How do you take a friendship that you currently have in your life and move it towards a meaningful one? How do you take a friendship you have and move it to a deeper level? What is the step you take? What is the path? How do you do that? And then I read this book. Christine Birch preached a fabulous message here in the summer on friendship, and she introduced us to this book by Jenny Allen, Find Your People. It's all about building deep community in a lonely world. It's like a Christian living book. Anybody can access it. It's fantastic. So I'm reading it, and she's sharing these principles of friendship, and I'm like, man, these are really, really great. But all of the examples in the book of her friends are all women. And I'm like, okay, that's great, but like, what about guy friends and finding guy friends? Because I really think, you might disagree with me, but I think words like friendship and words like relationship have kind of been feminized in our culture. Oh, it's our wives that are good at that. It's our girlfriend that's good at that. It's our daughters that are good at that. And I think that's why, if you're male, chances are statistically much, much higher that you feel lonely than female. Guys, come on. Let's be honest. A lot of us don't have many good friends. We don't have meaningful friendships in our life. And I was like, man, I got to figure this out. So I got looking at Scripture and I said, where are the bros? Where are the guy friends? Like, I want to learn from how do two guys create a meaningful friendship? The kind of friendship where, you can sit down together and you can have a conversation with one another and you get one another and you connect with one another. How do two guys build a meaningful friendship? And that's what I want to talk about today. I found these two guys, David and Jonathan, in Scripture. I saw them right away. And I looked at how their friendship was built. And I looked at the pathway they took. And I looked at what Jenny Allen had written. As I was reading these things together, I went, wow, I think there's a pathway here to build a meaningful friendship. And so today is going to be hyper practical. I'm going to take you through the account of David and Jonathan, and we're going to look specifically at their friendship. We're going to go from 1 Samuel 18 to 1 Samuel 20. And we're not going to read them all. So don't panic. I can see some of you already are like, we're going to read all of that today. No, we're not going to look at it all. What we're going to do is we're going to zoom over top and kind of drop in on the specific points of their friendship and see how they interacted and see how their friendship grew. And then by the end of this, you're going to walk away with a tool that you'll have to evaluate your own friendships and look at, man, what is a simple step that I could take to make the friendship more meaningful? Does that sound good? All right, are you sure? All right, man, you guys, I don't know, everybody needs a little extra coffee today. All right, so double up the dose in the back there. So what I'm going to do is you're going to walk away with that tool. Now, to give you some context of this, you've got David, who, even if you haven't been in church, you might have heard this. This is long before Jesus. David is famous because he defeated Goliath. There was this Philistine giant that the Israelites couldn't defeat, and David's a shepherd boy. He shows up, he defeats Goliath, and it turns out this shepherd boy is a pretty good warrior. And as a warrior, he's winning more and more battles over the course of these chapters. And what's happening is he's getting more and more popular. And Saul, who's the king, is getting more and more jealous of David, as we do as humans. Because David's getting more and more and more accolades, and Saul starts to feel more and more threatened. But Saul has a son, an heir to the throne, and his name is Jonathan. And Jonathan and David end up becoming friends. And that's kind of what happens in this story as you look at the account of these two friendships and how their friendship grows in depth and meaning. So we're going to jump into 1 Samuel chapter 18. It says this: after David had finished talking with Saul, he met Jonathan, the king's son. And David had just killed Goliath. And it says, there was an immediate bond between them, for Jonathan loved David. And it says this: from that day on, Saul kept David with him and wouldn't let him return home. So this is kind of an interesting play by Saul. He's like, man, this David guy's a good warrior, and I'm worried he might be a threat to the throne, so I'm going to keep him close to home. I'm not going to let him go anywhere. And you don't kind of get a timeline of how long this all was, but David is there with Saul in, let's call it the palace together. And what happens is David and Jonathan, because they're together in the same place all the time, become friends. The very first step to their relationship is proximity. Proximity is actually the beginning of a relationship. If you want to start a meaningful relationship, a meaningful friendship with someone, you actually have to spend time with them. You have to be together with that person. You have to say, okay, I'm going to connect with you. And the enemy of proximity is busyness, isn't it? I'm just too busy. I just don't have time. I just don't have time to connect with someone. I just don't have time to connect with her. I just don't have time to connect with him. We've got to figure out in the midst of our busy lives how to prioritize proximity with the people we want to build relationships with. Right? When you're with that other mom and you're at the side of the hockey rink and you're talking to one another and you're having a conversation together and you're like, okay, this is kind of proximity. We're kind of building some relationship. And maybe you want to say, hey, crazy idea. Why don't we take the kids and go grocery shopping together next week? That is a crazy idea, right? It's like a jungle gym on those shopping carts. But it's an idea of like, man, we got to build this into our lives. Like, hey, I'm not just going to go on break and get a coffee. Who at work can I invite who I want to increase the level of my friendship with? Hey, why don't you come with me? We're going for coffee together. Why don't you come over and help me fold laundry at home? Why don't you come over to my place? Why don't you come over to our place for dinner? Hey, do you want to grab a coffee? Hey, we got to get proximity with people. We've got to prioritize that in order to begin friendship. If you're not willing to spend time with anybody, you're not going to have any friends. And we got to be intentional about choosing who we're going to build proximity with, who we're going to spend time with, who we're going to connect with. And then it says this, and Jonathan made a solemn pact with David. Now, when it says, and Jonathan made a solemn pact with David, I don't know if what it's talking about there is, they kind of like put both their hands on each other and like made some kind of solemn pact, or if they were kind of blood brothers. I don't know what they did, but they made a solemn pact because he loved him as he loved himself. And what you see is their friendship goes from two guys who are hanging out in the castle, let's call it, to a direction of friendship. The relationship becomes that much more serious. Because what happens is they're giving it purpose. Purpose is the direction of a relationship. And a lot of us have a ton of friends, connections, with very little purpose. Shallowness is the enemy of purpose. A lot of us have a lot of shallow friendships, which is actually the enemy of deep friendships, of purposeful friendships. That's why we have small groups here at Connexus. When we have small groups that meet in people's homes during the week, it's because what we're trying to do is give some purpose to some of the relationships of people you connect with in the lobby. Because let's be honest, after this service today, you're going to go out to the lobby and you're going to see someone you know and you're going to have the same conversation you've had with them 10 times already. Oh yeah, I thought it was going to be a green January, it was a green Christmas. Oh yeah, man, see the snow's coming in tonight. Oh yeah, I shoveled the snow and it was so, It's the exact same conversation over and over again. Same, different day, same convo. Like at a certain point, some of those relationships got to go somewhere. Now, I'm not saying every relationship you have has to have purpose, but some of them do. They got to have some direction. There's a guy named Arthur Brooks. He teaches at Harvard. He actually teaches the science of happiness. He also has a great book called Strength to Strength for kind of the back half of your life. And he talks about real friends versus deal friends. Because he says, man, friendship is the most meaningful thing you can have if you want to have happiness in your life. And he says, but there are two types of friends, real friends and deal friends. Deal friends are the friends you kind of have because you're in the same place as them. The people you work with, the people at the side of the soccer field, the people at the side of the hockey rink, the people you go to school with right now, but you're never going to talk to those people again afterwards. And by the way, if you're in high school, just so you know, most of us don't talk to the people we went to high school with, right? We thought those were forever, but once we weren't together anymore. Those are deal friends. We're associated with those people. But then there's real friends. Friends who are with you through all the stages of life. Friends who are really living life with you. Friends who you've built life with. Friends who know you, who know who you are, who know what you're passionate about, who know what makes you tick. And there's nothing wrong with deal friends. The problem is that most of us, all we have are deal friends. You've got to bring some purpose to your relationship. Which are the people who are going to be, you want these people to be real friends. You want to have purpose, and which are the ones that are deal friends. This helps you to decide, just even those two categories, that you've got to build purpose into the friendship. Where is the friendship headed? And then what happens? This is, Jonathan sealed the pact by taking off his robe and giving it to David, together with his tunic, his sword, his bow, and his belt. So what does that mean? Are you supposed to give all your clothes to the person you want to be friends with? Taking off your clothes is not a healthy way to make friends. I'll tell you that right now. It's a whole other sermon, but no. Okay? So what is this really about? This is what you got to understand. Jonathan was the heir to the throne. He was supposed to become the king. And he takes his royal robes and he gives them to David, acknowledging, David, you know what I know? You really deserve to be the king. And the risk that this was, when Saul would find out that this happened, the shame that would be involved in that situation. But he says, authentically, transparently, David, I just want to tell you what's really going on. I really think that it's not me, it's you who should be the king. And what happens from here is the relationship goes to a whole other level. Transparency is the trust in a relationship. I want to tell you that if you want to build meaningful friendships in your life, you at a certain point have to be transparent. There has to be transparency. I'm going to tell you, I'll just be honest, there's no shortcut. There's no way around it. You can't not be transparent and have a meaningful friendship. It's just not the way it works. Now, the enemy, of course, of transparency is shame and pain. We say, man, but I've been hurt before. I chose to be transparent with someone and they used it against me. I chose to share something with someone and they just brushed it off. What if that happens again? And I'm going to tell you, it could happen again. There's a good chance it will happen in some cases again. But what's the alternative? The alternative is you build walls of pain and walls of shame, and you experience no meaningful relationship in your life. And you stay lonely, and your soul shrivels. If you want to have meaningful relationships in your life, you got to, at a certain point, choose transparency. And you know what? You have to go first. Because you can't come to someone and say to them, I really love us to have a good relationship. I hear transparency is the key. You go first. That doesn't work. It doesn't. You've got to go first. You've got to sit down and say, hey, how's it going? They're like, good. The snow and the green grass, green January, blah, 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 right? And then you go, and you say, hi, hey, how's it really going? And they're like, oh, I don't know. And I'm like, man, I know with me, we're really struggling with the kids right now. What if they judge you as a bad parent? Maybe they will. But what that does is it opens up, and you see if they share. Now, if you're going to choose to be transparent with someone, in order to move a friendship forward, they have to reciprocate transparency. If you're being transparent and the other person isn't, that's not a friend. That's a confessional, right? Don't be that person who drops on somebody in the lobby and dumps all your stuff and walks away. But if a person begins to reciprocate and there's authenticity in the relationship, man, that could be gold for you. I got a friend, his name is Chris. And Chris said to me at one point, he said, hey, Jeff, I've got 3 other friends. You're the 4th. None of you know one another. I think you would be great friends. I want to introduce you to one another. I'm like, oh, sure. And then he said, then he called me and said, you know what I want to do instead? I want to take you to a cottage, and we'll spend 2 days at the cottage. And I was reluctant until I saw the cottage. And I was like, I could give it a shot. So then we go to the cottage, and we have breakfast the first day, and we're all meeting one another. We had a good night the night before, and we have breakfast, and it's done. And then Chris says, I'm like, we're just here to hang out. And Chris is like, I want to share with you guys something from the Bible. And I'm like, well, I thought this was just hanging out. But you're like, I'm a pastor. I like the Bible, right? So Chris sits down, and he shares something out of the Bible, and a conversation begins. And I don't really know many of these guys. Some of them I didn't know at all. And the conversation begins about our lives and what's going on in our lives. And what happens is we end up praying for a couple of the guys. And then it's my turn. And I don't like that kind of transparency because I don't like people to know where I'm not doing well in my life. And I'm much better at it now than I was then. And I was like, I don't know these guys. Like, how can I say all this stuff? So I'll be honest, I probably with this group went like 50% of the way. But we had a great time. And so the next year, Chris said, let's do it all over again. So I was like, okay, let's do it again. Cottage was great. I did okay on the sharing time. We went back the next time. And what happened was we had a really great time, and I shared even more, and the prayer time was incredibly powerful. And then what ended up happening was we ended up keeping in touch on a text chain. Then we ended up having dinner together that year. And the next year we did it all again. And I was just able to share everything. And to be prayed for and cared for and to ask one another questions. And so what we do is we go to this cottage once a year. And then we would have dinner another time a year. But now we found it's not enough proximity, so we're getting together at the cottage twice a year. And this is that group of guys on the screen here. And you can tell, this is a little tip if you're in a photo, you can suck in. See, I'm sucking in there in the photo? But, and this is Chris in the middle. It was like a big night in his personal career, and we all showed up to celebrate with him. And these guys are the guys who we have conversations about, hey, when we're not doing this anymore, let's still keep hanging out together. When we're getting older and older, let's stay in each other's lives. Let's speak into each other's lives. What's happening is these are becoming the most meaningful friendships, some of the most meaningful friendships in my life. And I have this group of guys, and then I have a group of people here as well who have the ability where I can be transparent and I can be authentic with them, and they are with me. And as a result, the relationship becomes more meaningful because a greater level of trust is built. But you've got to be willing at a certain point to go there. So then what happens with David and Jonathan? Well, what happens is David starts to fear for his life because Saul's already taken a couple shots at him. The good news is Saul's not so good with the spear. And David is still alive, and he's like, man, Saul's coming after me. And he's fled, actually. And then you see this conversation between David and Jonathan that I think is really eye-opening. It says, now David fled from Naioth in Ramah, which are real places. I know they sound like Star Wars names, but they're real places, and found Jonathan. And David says, what have I done? He exclaimed. What is my crime? How have I offended your father that he is so determined to kill me? I mean, Jonathan, your dad wants me dead. That's not true, Jonathan protested. And so for the very first time, you see them disagree. Jonathan says, you're not going to die. My dad, he always tells me everything he's going to do, even the little things. I know my father wouldn't hide something like this from me. It just isn't so. It's not going to happen, David. I would know. Dad tells me everything. And David's like, no, man, like, I'm going to die. He's going to kill me. And it says, then David took an oath, which he's like, I swear, Jonathan, before Jonathan said, your father knows perfectly well about our friendship. And so your dad, he said to himself, I won't tell Jonathan. Why should I hurt him? But I swear to you that I am only a step away from death. I swear it by the Lord and by your own soul. Jonathan, I know you don't agree with me, but your dad's coming after me. And they end up having to work through this. You can read it yourself. Tell me what I can do to help you, Jonathan eventually exclaimed. What can I do? What can I do to help you? How can I be loyal to you? How can I be in your corner? It's interesting to me that when you see the two of them disagree, it's loyalty that undergirds the whole thing. There's a consistency that's there, that I will continue to be there for you, consistency. Consistency is the thing that creates resilience in any relationship. And you know what? The enemy of consistency and showing up for someone is unresolved conflict. That's the enemy to consistency. And this is a real problem for us in our culture today. Because we live in a culture where people say to other people, if you don't agree with me 100% on everything, you're out. You're not the same as you were before COVID. You're out. Politically, you're with who? I had no idea until I saw that Facebook post. I'm just not going to text them again. I'm going to spend, and we don't say, I don't want to be your friend anymore. We just slowly stop talking to other people. That's the healthiest way to handle it. Sweep it under the rug, ghost the person, reduce the amount of time we're going to spend. Instead of having the actual conversation, working through actual conflict, consistently being there for someone. Now I'm not saying, hey, you choose to be authentic and transparent with someone and they use it to hurt you and then you have a conflict and you should just take it and be involved in a toxic relationship. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is the fact that our ability to be resilient for our friends is so small today. That we are so reluctant to remain friends with people just because we disagree on one or two things. And we need to learn what it is to stick by someone even though we don't 100% agree with everything they believe and they agree with everything we believe. Because if you want to have all these meaningful relationships where everybody thinks everything that you think, you will have no meaningful relationships. Because eventually there will be something. Right? There's always something. Ask two people who got married and then started to live together for the very first time, right? And it's like, you use Crest and I use Aquafresh? I can't do this. There's an element of we got to understand, we got to be the kind of people who sit with people face to face and work through our conflict. Because what happens is your relationship gets stronger and stronger and stronger when you work through it. Right? It's the same in a marriage. When you work through the conflict times, which can go long, and you get to the other side, your relationship is stronger. But if you give up right away and walk away, everything blows apart and you lose the opportunity to see what it's like to come out on the other side. We're going to talk about that next week, 2 weeks from now. So then what happens with Jonathan and David is you see their consistency and their loyalty. And this is what happens next. It says, show me this loyalty as a sworn friend. For we made a solemn pact before the Lord. Or kill me yourself if I've sinned against your father. This is David talking. But Jonathan, please don't betray me. Don't betray me. And then what happens is you can see they sort of come up with this whole plan where Jonathan is going to go to this festival dinner, and he's going to say, oh, David couldn't be here, he had a family thing. And that happens for 2 dinners in a row to see what happens with Saul, if he'll get upset. And Saul does get upset. But they're hashing out this plan. And as they're hashing out the plan, he says this, but if he is angry and wants you killed, Jonathan says, when we go to that dinner, may the Lord strike me and even kill me if I don't warn you so you can escape and live. If I go to that dinner and he's angry and I don't warn you, man, I'm promising you, I will warn you. May the Lord be with you, David, as he used to be with my father, and may you treat me with the faithful love of the Lord as long as I live. But Jonathan says, but if I die, if my dad does something to me, if I die, or something ever happens to me, treat my family with faithful love, even when the Lord destroys all your enemies from the face of the earth. And so Jonathan made a solemn pact with David, saying, may the Lord destroy all your enemies. And Jonathan made David reaffirm his vow of friendship again, for Jonathan loved David as he loved himself. What's happening here? Is David saying to Jonathan, don't turn your back on me. Don't betray me. I'm calling you out, man. I hope you're not doing anything behind the scenes. And Jonathan is saying to David, I'm in. I'm going to tell you. Jonathan says, but David, when you do become the king, is what he's saying. If I die one day, will you look out for my family? Because this is what they would expect. If David became the king, Jonathan would expect he could just wipe out his whole family. Then there'd be no line anymore. He's saying to David, if you become the king, I've got your back, but do you have mine? If you become the king, at the end of the day, will you look out for me? Will you look out for my family? If something happens to me? What's happening here in this relationship? They're calling one another out on their stuff. There's a level of accountability happening here. See, accountability creates depth in a relationship. Accountability is what creates depth. When you give someone else, and you have to give them permission, when you give someone else permission to call you out on things and to speak into your life, man, that's when real meaningful depth happens. But you know why this is hard? Because of pride. Pride is the enemy of accountability. I've got that group I showed you, and then a group here locally who I give permission to speak into my life. And some of you know, about 1.5 years ago, I took 3 months off in the summer. I just came to you and shared, man, I'm really tired. I'm not burnt out, but I feel like I'm on the way to that. And that started because somebody who has permission to hold me accountable said to me, Jeff, do you think you're on the road to burnout in your life? And you know what I said? Nah. Not me. I just need, a nap and a coffee and I'll be fine. Are you sure, Jeff? I'm fine. Next time we got together, 2 weeks later, are you sure you're not burning out? And the tears started to come down my face. And I've called Chris, who you saw in that circle there. We talk multiple times a week. And he said to me, Jeff, I'm telling you, I really think you need to take a break. I'm not asking. And those 3 months, one of the best things that ever happened to me, as a dad, as a husband, as a pastor of this church, because someone had the depth of relationship with me that they could say that to me. Do you have somebody like that? Who are the meaningful relationships that you have in your life? Because you're made for them. You're wired for them. I mean, watch what happens next in the story. David's hiding out. Jonathan shows up to give him the news on what his dad had said. It says David came out from where he had been hiding near the stone pile. I guess the stone pile is a good place to hide. It says, then David bowed 3 times to Jonathan with his face to the ground in humility. And both of them were in tears as they embraced each other and said goodbye, especially David. And last, Jonathan said to David, you go in peace, for we have sworn loyalty to each other in God's name. And the Lord is the witness of our bond between us and our children forever. And after this day, Jonathan dies on the battlefield with his dad. And David watches out for his family. And in particular, Jonathan has a son who, as a result of an accident, has injuries to his feet, which would have been socially something people would have shunned, and David took him in as his very own son. Loyal to the end. That's not just some story in the Bible. That's the kind of meaningful relationships God wants for you. It's not something out there. It's not just a history book. It's the kind of relationship that you're wired for. But you got to build them. Meaningful relationships aren't something you just fall into. There's something you got to fight for. You got to fight for meaningful relationships in your life. And what I want to ask you to do is choose 2 key relationships. I want you to think of 2 people who you want to take to the next level in the next 3 weeks. And I'll put the triangle on the board here. Can we throw that up? Thank you, guys. You know, when it comes to this, 2 friends, maybe it's somebody who's not even on the triangle, and you're going to start to move towards proximity. Or somebody who you spend time with, but you want to give that relationship some purpose. Or a relationship that has purpose, but you've never been transparent with this person in any single way. Some of you haven't been transparent with anyone. Who outside of your own marriage or family will you actually choose to be transparent with? You've got to go first. Consistency. Who do you need to go back to? Who's the friend you ghosted? Who's the friend you walked away? Just because you were too chicken to have a hard conversation. Because you have no idea by not having that conversation what you left in the ditch that could have been yours. You invested all that time and all that energy in that relationship, and because of that one conversation, you threw it to the wayside. Some of those relationships are worth salvaging. Some of those people you're related to. And accountability. Somebody who's consistently a friend, but you've never said to them, I'm giving you permission to ask me questions about my marriage or my relationships or my habits or my hang-ups or my finances, but I'm giving that permission to you. Fight for the meaningful relationships in your life. They're not just going to find you. And what I want for you is one day for you to be sitting at the kitchen table or hanging out with some buddies or sitting with someone on a park bench and just feeling a real sense of contentment because this person is a real friend. Because these are your real friends, not your deal friends. And the day when your mom or dad die, they're going to show up with a casserole. On the day when you've made a mistake with your kids or with your spouse, that this is the person you're going to call and they're going to show up no matter how bad you messed up. And they're going to keep cheering you on. And they're going to stay in your corner. The people who are going to be at your funeral if you're not at theirs. The real kind of relationships. You're made for it. You're designed for it. You deserve it. But you got to fight. Let me pray. God, we come to you today, and I just want to pray that your Spirit, for anybody who's hearing my voice, would give courage to us. Courage to us to be intentional about meaningful relationships. Not every relationship, but the 3 to 5 in our own lives that we can lean into. Where they have our back and we have theirs. Where we work through conflict, where we stick by each other, where we have meaning in our lives. God, we're not made to be lonely. Give us the courage to fight for meaningful relationships in our lives. And then thank you for the gift of your Son, Jesus, who calls us friend. That even on the days our friends let us down, that he never lets us down. Thank you for the opportunity to have a relationship with him. And we pray this in your name. Amen.